Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Thanks for being here with us on this Friday afternoon. Maybe it's a Friday evening where you are, or maybe you are one of the lucky ones that lives on the other side of the international date line, and it's already Saturday morning for you. You already got your feet up watching Saturday morning cartoons, and you decided, let's listen to Catholic Answers Live. We're glad you're here wherever you are, and we have a good show for you. Second hour, we're going to do Ask a Priest, and Father Keys will be here. We'll do Ask a Priest, meaning you can ask anything that you might have thought, I wish I had a Catholic priest to ask that of. It could be a pastoral question, a prayer question, a theological question, whatever you like. That's second hour. First hour, we are delighted to have Dr. Matthew Bunson back with us, the Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. He's a senior fellow at the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. He teaches church history at the Catholic Distance University, and he's still looking for a fourth part-time job if you've got one available. And we'll do the church in the news today. Dr. Bunson, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, it's great to be with you as always. I think the last time we talked was during the Synod on Synodality.
Oh, yeah, the legendary, and I'm sure we'll speak again during the Synod on Synodality.
We will, yes.
The number here, if you want to get involved, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. And the Synod on Synodality, actually, since you brought it up, they'll meet again next October. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
That's
you'll be there in Rome personally?
I will be there, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly as I was for the last Synod and the bunch before that, too.
And then, so just so that I know what happens, this is what I picture in my mind. They finish, they give some sort of document to Pope Francis, and then he writes an apostolic letter or exhortation or something.
Yeah, it's technically called a post-synodal apostolic exhortation, or as somebody once said, it sounds like something you need to take medicine for.
I know, right? Twice a day.
The big question, really, this is a two-part synod, as you know, and the work is continuing. We know that coming out of the synod last October, they had an interim report, so to speak, that had not a fair amount of controversy attached to it, let's put it that way. And now there's an expectation that globally, different bishops' conferences are going to be asking some of the questions that emerged out of that interim report. Now, the worry has been that some of this is going back to square one with some of the listening sessions and other things. So there still is, to no one's surprise, a certain haziness about what exactly we're supposed to be doing between the end of this this first session and then the start of the second. We do know that Pope Francis is very invested in this second session, and it's essentially everyone who took part in the first session last October is coming back to Rome to take part in this next one.
Oh, that's good. Nobody got fired, but I think I heard so many different people with different evaluations. I cannot remember. I think it might have been Archbishop Chaput, formerly of Philadelphia, who said one thing that he thought was very good at the synod was high church officials sitting with the laity and just talking.
Yes.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, I did. And in fact, in a number of the prelates and bishops, archbishops, and some cardinals that I know expressed that same thing, that if that is the concept and implementation of synodality on the ground, then it actually worked. And part of that was the way it was designed. All of them sat around these tables, these famous round tables, and then they moved from table to table in order to really make sure that everyone's heard. Now, that brought with it some frustration. First, because I think some of the bishops felt that voices weren't being heard, that they had one chance to speak, basically, throughout the whole month. And so that not to sound clericalist in any way, but the average layperson who was attending had more time in some cases than some of the highest ranking church leaders who were actually running the synod. I mean, it depends on which voices you want to hear. The other area was that, and this I think was something of a surprise to the organizers, just how strong the opposition was to discussion on what we knew going in were going to be a lot of these hot topics. The ordination of women, for example. We know that based on the discussions on the floor and then even in the final report, that topic, a lot of the so-called LGBTQ topics, ordaining the viri probati, ordaining seasoned men to move from deacons to priests, for example. All of these very controversial topics were confronted, and they were surprised at the levels of opposition, especially because one of the topics that was not supposed to be discussed were these hot button issues. In other words, this was supposed to be an exercise in synodality, and there were a lot of questions asked why these particular topics were raised as they were.
Oh, very interesting. Well, if you need any, I don't know, special correspondence or anything in Rome, I'm happy to come. Just pick up the phone. I'm your man.
Spending weeks and weeks covering a synod.
No, I didn't say I'm going to cover the synod. I'll
Okay,
report on the
yes.
general atmosphere of the place.
Yes, hence the importance of special correspondence.
Yeah, exactly. Right. More of a food critic role, I think.
Yes.
The number here is 888-318-7884. One thing there's never a shortage of is church news. And probably the biggest topic, and I am somewhat loath to talk about it only because it feels talked out, is that fiducia supplicans. But the Pope had something to say about that today. Maybe you could just review that with us.
He did. Well, I mean, just in the last few days, in fact, in the last week or so, there have been several pretty interesting developments. We can start with today because we always start with Pope Francis, of course. And he had a meeting, a plenary session with the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. That is the Vatican department that used to be the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the famous CDF. Now it's the DDF, headed by the author of Fiducia Supplicans, and that is Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, the recently established or ensconced prefect. And Pope Francis used the opportunity to revisit some of the key points that he was trying to make in Fiducia. And one of them is that this is that separation, that key innovation that Cardinal Fernandez has been talking about from the very beginning with this document, that there has to be a separation between liturgical blessings and pastoral blessings. And Pope Francis made that point again today. And that was even in the clarification from Cardinal Fernandez. We can talk more about that if you want. But the other is coming back to this idea of that blessings of this type, the non-liturgical ones in this setting, are not for, as he put it, the morally perfect. In fact, one of the points that he was trying to make today and reiterating on again, these key themes, is that it is for those who present themselves for these blessings. And the way he put it, and I can quote it, is that the intent of the pastoral and spontaneous blessings is to show the closeness of the Lord and the church to all those who, finding themselves, he said, in different situations, ask help to carry on, sometimes to begin a journey of faith. And he again stressed that the blessings come outside any context and form of liturgical character and do not require, as he said, moral perfection to be received, but it's spontaneous. And he said the union is not blessed, but simply the people who have requested it together. Now, that's an interesting, subtle shift, even from the document itself, which uses the term couples. And if you look in all the different languages that has been published, I've read it in the French, the Italian, the Spanish, and the German. It very clearly uses couples. Here, Pope Francis seems to be shifting the emphasis a little bit for himself on persons rather than even couples. Unions has always been removed from the discussion as something that the church should be able even to recognize, as you know.
888-318-7884 if you've got a question about the church in the news for our guest, Dr. Matthew Bunson, the editorial director at EWTN News, 888-318-7884. Oh, well, just one more thing then on Fiducia Supplicans, and that is we had a question one day here about it, the tenor of it was kind of like, this wasn't the exact question, but it was the tenor. Under the undertone was: were the African bishops dissenting from the Pope in their kind of response to the document?
Yeah, actually, it's a great question, and it's a timely one because in the immediate reaction to Fiducia, we had two very different interpretations of the document. We had first, and very quickly, those who are in secular media and those, I would say, who are in progressive Catholic media, who really went to some lengths to try to interpret this as the church somehow recognizing same-sex unions.
Mm-hmm.
And we know, of course, that the document does not allow that. It does not foresee it, and it's very clearly stated in the document. So, for example, we have what we could call here a celebrity priest who's well known, who had a spontaneous and simple blessing for a same-sex couple in his apartment in New York, and it just so happened that a reporter and photographer from the New York Times were there to document all of it.
What a coincidence!
Immediately,
what a remarkable coincidence!
And then we had another situation that made the rounds that caused the usual uproar in social media of a priest in, I think it was the Lexington diocese, who actually did a blessing, but he was wearing a stole, and it seemed to be in what one was unmistakably looking like a liturgical setting. And so you had that, and that, I think, was part of the reason why we had the clarification issued from Cardinal Fernandez, where he talks about that this has to be non-liturgical. It has to be simple and spontaneous, is the phrase that he keeps coming back to. But then we had bishops all over the world who expressed very serious concerns with this document from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And chief among them, were the Africans. And the African bishops themselves, really, again, from the beginning, said that it is almost impossible for them to implement this because of the confusion, bafflement, and even scandal that it could potentially cause among the faithful. And that culturally in Africa, this is simply not possible for them to do. We also had the Eastern Catholic churches, I think the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in particular, stating that within the code of canons for the Eastern Church, it's not permitted because they don't make that similar differentiation or separation between liturgical and pastoral blessings. Every blessing for them is liturgical. Then, of course, we had the Orthodox weighing in too with really the same problem. Mm-hmm. That they simply cannot accept this, and they saw fiducia as a real hindrance now to ecumenical dialogue. All of that being said, the one that I think really garnered the most attention were the Africans, because in short order, Episcopal conferences all over Africa began issuing their own statements and declarations, all in agreement with each other. And it culminated with a letter that was issued by the head of essentially the African bishops, the Symposium of Episcopal Conferences of Africa and Madagascar, and that's Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo Basungu, who is himself an appointee by Pope Francis, I think, in 2019. And he issued a letter essentially explaining they're stressing that they're in full communion with Pope Francis.
Right.
They want to try to implement this, but they simply can't. And there was a fascinating report that came out in a couple of news sites, including a French lay Catholic blog called Le Salon Beige, that he explained what happened. He went to Rome and actually met with Pope Francis, and then with Cardinal Fernandez, drafted the letter that was subsequently published. So clearly, with the full awareness of Pope Francis and Cardinal Fernandez, the Africans essentially opted out from much of the requirements of fiducia.
But that is not dissent when you go to Rome and write the letter with
that's
the dicastery.
Exactly so. And I think that's one of the big points that the African bishops were trying to make here by stressing again that they're in communion with Pope Francis. They recognize the pastoral value of blessings of those who are in these irregular situations, and those that the African bishops are very strong in saying are living in situations of obvious sin, and they cannot bless sin. But then we come to Cardinal Fernandez himself, who, if you remember, now famously issued this clarification of fiducia just about 2 weeks or so after the original document, the declaration, was released, in order to try to answer some of the criticisms, but also to reiterate some of the key points of it. And he said in that clarification that expressing opposition or concern regarding this document is not dissent. And he said they're not dissenting in part because his argument, and it's I think a straightforward one, is that there's no new doctrine being espoused in Fiducia Supplicans. So there's no document, there's no teaching from which to dissent.
Oh, I see, because dissent refers to doctrine.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
So his argument is that there's nothing new here. It's an innovation, he said, of how the church looks at blessings. But from the beginning, Cardinal Fernandez has argued that there's no new teaching here, that there's no change in doctrine. So there's nothing in his situation, as far as he's concerned, from which one would dissent. So there have been some comparisons made, for example, to Humanae Vitae. I think it's a false comparison, in part because the opposition and dissent at the time in 1968 and beyond to Humanae Vitae was a dissent from the clarity of church teaching.
Yeah.
In this case, those are expressing concerns that the teaching in Fiducia is not clear enough. So that, I think, we have to be careful about these types of comparisons that are being made. I think if we need an analogy or need to torture the analogies further, I think the closest one would be Amoris Laetitia, where coming out of that document and the famous footnotes regarding possibilities of communion for those who are civilly divorced and civilly remarried and whether or not they can receive communion, we found ourselves in the unfortunate situation of very differing approaches to that question, even in neighboring countries. So, for example, in Germany, they had the widest possible interpretation of Amoris, whereas in Poland, they have the strictest possible interpretation. I think we're seeing something similar here with Fiducia Supplicans, where the Germans are plowing ahead. We'll see how that plays out with what they expect to be liturgical blessings in opposition to Fiducia. So if we're looking for dissent, there it is. But we also then have the Africans, the Dutch, most of Eastern Europe. We have a number of bishops in South America, in Central America, and across Asia who are in ardent opposition to this particular document.
We got to take a break. If you want to talk about the church in the news, whatever the story is, if you want to talk about it with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Right back with more after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Catch Catholic Answers Live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Catechism in a Year with me, Father Mike Schmitz, is now available right here on Catholic Radio. Encounter God's plan of sheer goodness for us, revealed in Scripture and passed down through the tradition of the Catholic faith, as we journey together toward our heavenly home.
Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz, tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, talking about the church in the news with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. And if you don't know, EWTN News covers a lot of news. I mean, we have news on the EWTN network, but you also have, I wouldn't even begin to try to get them all, but the National Catholic Register is in there.
Yes, it is.
Catholic News Agency is under you guys, is that right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
What else?
Well, we're a multi-platform news entity, and that includes television. We have radio shows, and then we have a pretty massive digital presence, of course.
Right.
We have 13 different language agencies.
Oh, wow.
Spread around the globe. So just to name a few, we have Assi Prensa in Spanish, Aci Stampa in Italian. We have ACI Africa, which I think is doing really important work for us in Africa. We also have Asimina, which means sort of the news agency for the Middle East and North Africa, which is based in Iraq and covers, as you can imagine, the whole of the Near East and much of the Middle East. And then we have Asi Digital, which is in Portuguese. We've got the CNA Deutsch. And then we have, of course, the National Catholic Register, which is sort of the standard bearer for deeper dives news coverage, which is still published. And it's one of the rarest.
I know, you can get it delivered
animals.
to your house.
Yes, you can. It's long been one of the rare animals in modern Catholic media. Because our subscriptions have actually gone up over the years.
That's
at a time
a
when everyone
miracle.
else is collapsing.
Yeah.
And then we have billions of impressions on our news sites. And then that doesn't even count our news programming,
Right.
which includes EWTN News Nightly, EWTN News in Depth, The World Over with Raymond Arroyo, and Pro-Life Weekly.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, and Noticias, which is like the ENN or News Nightly in Espanol.
Well, one of the great services that you do, I mean, and there's many contributions I think that Catholic news can make, including covering whole areas of the culture that will be ignored by mass media. But one of the services you do is reporting on those places where the Catholic community itself is persecuted. And
Yes.
Can we just talk about a few of those places?
Yeah, I'm so happy that you want to talk about this because it is probably the most underreported story that you'll find anywhere. And every day, for those of us who pay attention to it, you can read about deaths and persecutions and massacres. I'm thinking especially in recent days and recent years in a country like Nigeria in sub-Saharan Africa, where tens of thousands of Christians, of Catholics, have died at the hands of Islamic extremists, in particular groups like Boko Haram, Fulani herdsmen, and others, and then bandit groups. And it is a war that is being waged right now on Christianity around the world. And as we speak, somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 million Christians around the world are facing some form of persecution. That means social, legal disabilities. That means that when you wake up in the morning and you're a Christian in some of these countries, there's a very good chance that during the day you will face discrimination, violence, and even death. And that's the daily reality for Christians around the world.
And, you know, it's I think it would not to guilt people, because there are resources. Like, you could just get the National Catholic Register, or maybe make it a daily habit to get the emails from National Catholic Register, and you will be kept abreast of these things. You're not going to get it from the alphabet soup of TV and cable networks.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's why one of the big roles for the Catholic press is covering the global reality of Catholicism. And, Pope Francis talks a lot about the periferia, the peripheries. And we see one of our most important jobs is covering these stories of Christian persecution around the world, because no one else is.
Yeah, well, then let's talk, if we could, for a minute about Nicaragua, because I mean, like, just the seizure of properties, the imprisoning of bishops, a whole university just taken by the government there, by the communist government of Nicaragua.
The list of actions by the Ortega regime, and we use the term regime now because that's really what it is. It is, for those of us who are getting older, we can remember in the late 70s and then into the 80s, the Sandinista regime that toppled the old, I think it was the Somoza regime in Nicaragua, and tried to install a Marxist regime that was supposed to be one of the gateways for the Soviet empire into the Western Hemisphere in a way that Cuba couldn't. And eventually that fell, especially once the Soviet Union collapsed. But the name that was always hovering around was Daniel Ortega. And he managed to get himself elected president of Nicaragua and moved very quickly, as various people warned he would, because once a Marxist dictator, you're always going to be one, to seize control of the levers of power, the levers of government, and then to begin ruthlessly suppressing all forms of human and civil rights in Nicaragua. His primary opponent, because the political reality was that he was able to shut down so much of the opposition, was the Catholic Church. And I think in particular of Bishop Rolando Alvarez, who became really enemy number one for the Ortega regime. He was arrested, imprisoned in the worst prison in the whole of Latin America. Subsequently, eventually released into the hands of the Vatican. But that was just the tip of the iceberg of terrible behavior on the part of Nicaragua.
You can hear the music. We'd love your calls, 888-318-7884. We'll talk a bit more about Nicaragua, about the great story that you don't hear. I don't mean great in a good sense. The big story of persecution of Catholics around the world will continue. 888-318-7884 is the number.
Why We're Catholic is the one book you can hand to anyone to invite them into or back to the Catholic faith. With more than 400,000 copies sold, Trent Horn's book has had a #1 ranking on Amazon.com for 5 years running. Now available in softcover, bulk cases, ebook, and on Audible. Find out what the excitement is all about. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic at shop.catholic.com or visit whywearecatholic.com.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Are you scared to talk about abortion? Don't worry, almost everyone is. You can overcome this fear as Trent Horn shows in the newly revised and expanded second edition of Persuasive Pro-Life. With a little knowledge and a few proven techniques, you can become a bold and effective apologist for life. Visit shop.catholic.com to order your copy of Persuasive Pro-Life and never again be afraid to speak up. Also available at good Catholic bookstores.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Dr. Matthew Bunson is our guest. Your calls are welcome regarding the church in the news. He's the guy to talk to. He's the vice president and editorial director of EWTN News, many of the outlets of which we mentioned in the last segment, but it's big. And one of the great things about that, Dr. Bunson, is reporting is just not what news services do anymore. You get a lot of opinion. Right. Cable news used to be 24-hour news. Now it's 5 minutes an hour you get of news. The rest of it is now we go to the panel, and the panel all has the same opinion, and then we go to another panel, and you all don't do that. You do
uniformly the same.
It's hard work to report the news, and you all do that hard work.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Over the last 10 years, especially, as you know, I'm based here in Washington, D.C. We have our offices in D.C. right on Capitol Hill. And to be able to have, I've referred to it for many, many years as a beachhead in the political and media culture in the world today. I mean, you could establish yourselves in New York if you wanted, but this is obviously the political capital of the United States. And that means that we also have reporters up on Capitol Hill. We have Eric Rosales, for example, for News Nightly. He's our Capitol Hill correspondent. We have Owen Jensen, who's at the White House. We have a variety of reporters from the Catholic News Agency and the National Catholic Register roaming the halls of Congress on a daily basis, and then going to the State Department, the Defense Department, the Pentagon, and then we've got all of the reporters around the world. So we're pretty uniquely positioned, certainly within Catholic media today, to be able to cover stories literally all over the globe. And that means something.
It sure does. Let me ask you about one other hotspot in the globe. I mean, the thing with Nicaragua is there just seems to be no outrage about it at all among the chattering classes. I mean, outrage is the way you get things done now, and nobody seems to be at all concerned that the Catholic Church is under obvious, unjust, and brutal attack in Nicaragua.
Well, a good example, a name that we don't hear that much now, but ISIS. And if you remember how long it took for the State Department, for example, and I'm not dumping on the U.S. State Department, to go ahead and formulate the accusations of genocide on the part of ISIS, where the persecution of the Christians in Iraq and the Yazidi minorities as well. And that took an immense amount of media pressure and political pressure to actually get some kind of a formal statement. And in similar ways, we've seen a lot of foot dragging in where Nicaragua is concerned, in part because there just isn't a lot of interest in that.
No.
The focus of secular media is elsewhere. Now, are there a lot of major stories to be covering? We have several wars taking place right now that any one of them could spill into World War III. So that is something. We have the global phenomenon of mass migration, anyone who's been to the southern border, but it's not just the southern border, as much of a crisis as that seems to be. But we're seeing millions wandering around the world at any given moment, trying to find a new place for safety because of all of this political upheaval. So the secular media would say, well, there's just too much else going on for us to cover all of this in depth. But that doesn't mean that these stories shouldn't be covered and need to be covered.
Right. They should. And I do think it frustrates some people that, you know, there are certain subgroups, particularly what might be referred to as sexual minorities, that if one person got oppressed in Nicaragua, it would be world news. But you can take the property of and jail the priests and bishops of the Catholic Church, and it's not news. So
that's right.
You would have time if you cared. That's the way it feels, I think, to Catholics.
Well, that's right. In any news organization, any news entity, you have gatekeeping.
Yeah, right.
It is the decision of what you choose to cover. And it is very clear that the secular media, and I would add to that most of progressive Catholic media, has a very different set of concerns than would probably be of the primary worry of a Catholic now in Nicaragua, a Catholic in Nigeria, in China, in Pakistan, in Venezuela, and elsewhere.
So how about China? We'll just get a word on China before we move on to another story. But we're talking about the Church in the News with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. Your calls welcome, 888-318-7884. What's the status of Catholic life in China?
Yeah, well, it's part of it, the reality is it depends on which province you're in. The persecution of the church varies significantly from province to province. There are some that are much more aggressive. Overall, the situation is dire on two different fronts. We have the very clear effort on the part of Premier Xi Jinping to implement what he is calling the sinicization of all religion in China, to make it truly beholden to the state. That means, for example, even going so far as to rewrite the Ten Commandments, to make it literally illegal for people who are under the age of 18 to enter a church. He's done very similar efforts at control with the Muslim minorities, the Uyghurs, for example, who are, for the most part, in various concentration camps now. But then we have the added complication of the Vatican-China deal on what was the goal of it, and it has been renewed temporarily a couple of times, to try to regularize the life of the church there, in particular in the area of the appointment of bishops. We just saw the appointment of the first bishop in a particular diocese in China for the first time, I think, in 70 years. And we are seeing some significant discussion, again for the first time, between church leaders in China and the Beijing regime. I think, for example, I think it's Cardinal Chao, who's in Hong Kong, who made a trip to Beijing, something that really would have been almost unimaginable just a few years ago. Controversial as this agreement has been, and violated repeatedly by the Chinese government, we are seeing at least some appointments that are going through in a way that at least gives some prospect for long-term cooperation.
Again, 888-318-7884. All right, so it's not all bad news. The news of the church around the world is not all bad news. So I am going to get to callers, but I want to ask you, because you prompted me with and I don't know about this. What are we getting as far as statistics about religious sisters and brothers? What's coming out on that?
Yeah, well, so this is one of the, we were talking about some good news, and every year we get these various reports on what is happening around the world in terms of men and women religious. And one of the things that I thought was really quite compelling was a series of new reports about what they all have in common. And there's a great article, in fact, that was just posted by Joe Bakuris from the Catholic News Agency, based on the most recent statistics from, this is a name that pops up, I know, from time to time here, Georgetown University Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, or CARA. Mm-hmm. And what they're finding is that it polled 101 religious in the U.S. Who professed their vows in 2023. 48 religious brothers and priests and 53 religious sisters were surveyed. What they found is the vast, vast majority had one thing in common, and that is they came from stable two-parent families. Oh. And yeah, it's really quite compelling, because it's a barometer of a lot of other things that bleeds even into a discussion about where the nuns, N-O-N-E-S's, are now. But what it found is that 90% of respondents said that they were raised by their biological parents during at least the most formative parts of their childhood. 88% said they were raised by a married couple living together during their formative years. Only 5% were raised by one parent who is divorced or separated. So what we're seeing is that the stability of family life is very crucial to the faith formation, which we knew, but also as a possible predictor or an incubator, so to speak, a cradle for the listening to vocations. You know, I think one of the real concerns that those of us who track all of this or try to is that how many young men had vocations to the priesthood, but no one ever asked them, or they lived in an environment that simply didn't foster the idea of a vocation for whatever reason. So family life is very important. It's why we have to have such a strong focus and emphasis on the nuclear family, the traditional family, but authentic, faithful families.
Boy, isn't that something? It gives you a sense of that the answer is a holistic answer. It's a healthy community that's going to produce healthy numbers of vocations.
Yes, yeah, and that means that you also need to have parishes that are promoting vocations and doing everything they can to strengthen family life. But it also comes with a sober recognition that if we're going to be fostering these vocations, what do we need to do in recognizing the collapse of the traditional family and so many of the stresses and challenges that single parents face, that families of divorce face? You know, it's easy then to simply dismiss them as they're unhealthy, or that they're not doing their job in fostering vocations, when in fact the heroic work, for example, that single moms do and single fathers do every day in trying to raise their kids in the faith, I think is truly commendable. But it's a stark reminder then that we've got to provide them with the resources that they need and the help they need.
Amen.
In these pastoral situations.
Right. That our social policy has to be about family. Which is why the
USCCB just, I think it was just 2 days ago or so, issued it was Archbishop Boris Gudziak, who's in charge of the Committee for Domestic Policy, the USCCB, commended, and this is a word that you don't hear much these days, and that's bipartisan progress on a family tax credit bill making its way through Congress that could actually benefit families and lift a lot of families, especially poor children, out of poverty. So it's little things like this that we can do. Public policy has great significance, as we're seeing.
Yep.
If you have a government administration that really focuses on a very different agenda from the one, for example, that might be advanced by Catholic social teaching, that raises all sorts of challenges. And it's a statement of fact that every different administration is going to have disagreements with Catholic teaching in one fashion or another. The question is, how do we build those bridges of cooperation?
888-318-7884. I said I'd go to callers. Let's start with Tom in Nebraska, Omaha, Nebraska, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Tom, go ahead with your with your question for our guest, Dr. Matthew Bunson.
Okay, here's what it is. Thanks for taking my call first. Do you think that one of the reasons that these places around the world are persecuting Catholics, killing them and so forth, and for the American press right here in the United States, that they actually like that? The media and so on, they aren't so upset about that. If the Catholic Church is being destroyed, fine with them. They don't care.
Okay, Tom.
As evidenced in even American papers where they never say anything good about Catholics, but they'll say every lie and half-truth and everything that they can. Okay, so what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's been made very clear that there are a number of, well, if not the majority of members of the secular media, and I'm not going to sit attacking the secular media here, but they hold positions in many different ways that are diametrically opposed to what the church has traditionally taught and continues to teach around the world. For example, the church's opposition to same-sex marriage, for example, is something I think also of the church's very clear opposition to abortion are things that the vast majority of secular news outlets today, and this goes from the major entities such as the New York Times and the Washington Post all the way down to what we see even on local television stations, that they are clearly in favor of abortion. And that, one way or another, tends to be reflected in their coverage. And so, as you and I were talking, Cy, the lack of interest then, it's just an absence of curiosity as to what is happening to Christians around the world. As we were saying, that in terms of journalistic gatekeeping, they make these choices. And I've sat in on a number of editorial discussions in very prominent news organizations over the decades. And they do indeed set editorial priorities, not just on a daily, but a weekly, monthly, and even yearly basis. So this is something that's important to them, and it places them, I should say correctly, places us in opposition to what they see are certain accepted realities and journalistic positions.
Tom, thank you for the call and for the question. I have to take a quick break. The folks who are on the phone, hang on. We're going to get right back to you when we come back. Dr. Matthew Bunson is our guest. We're talking about the church in the news with the vice president and editorial director of EWTN News. More of that right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend? A coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul, and that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come? At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
EWTN Radio is seeking a dynamic radio producer to join the EWTN radio team in Irondale, Alabama. The right candidate will be a passionate, multi-skilled, talented professional who can manage and direct all aspects of producing world-class radio broadcasts and play an integral part in Mother Angelica's mission. For all the details about this exciting opportunity, visit EWTN.com and click on Employment at the bottom of the page.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. 888-318-7884 is our number. Next hour, Father Keys will be here, and we will do Ask a Priest. We'll end the work week with Ask a Priest. If there's a question you've been wanting to ask a Catholic priest about your prayer life, your family life, sacramental life, or maybe a theological or moral question, they're all welcome next hour. This hour, Dr. Matthew Bunson, our guest, we're talking about the church in the news. 888-318-7884. I go now to Boise, Idaho. Kathleen is in Boise, Idaho, listening on the Salt and Light Radio Network. Glad to have you, Kathleen. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Bunson.
Thank you. I was watching the Archbishop of Ohio on the pro-life, and one of the things, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going on, but what he said was we put our eggs in the political basket. I had an idea. And Matthew Bunson was talking about Nigeria and not being said. What if the USSB, the bishops, called for this land for us to pray and fast for Nigeria? Step over the administration to say they're whatever, God will take care of that. So maybe if we do our best, Jesus will take care of the rest.
Kathleen, interesting that you paired that with the idea that we put all our eggs in the political basket, because that, I see what you're saying is, why not have a kind of spiritual response primarily, and because we're Catholic, we're not just a political organization. Is that where you're going with that, Kathleen?
Correct.
All right, Dr. Bunson?
Yeah, first I think it's a very good idea, and we can even broaden it out that we need to be praying and fasting and remembering the Christians, the Catholics who are being persecuted all over the world. And I think Nigeria is a particular case in point because of its strategic importance. Not to say that suffering of Christians is more important in one place than another, but the reality is that there is a genuine spiritual and religious and political struggle happening in sub-Saharan Africa, with pressures coming down from the north because of radical Islam. You have a government in Nigeria that is pretty openly biased toward the Islamic radicals. It is essentially an Islamic government. And in that sense, then the more that we can do to make people aware of it, the better. I would note that in 2023, so just last year, the U.S. bishops used Religious Freedom Week back in June to highlight the problems of religious freedom in Nigeria. And it included things like prayer and reflection. And the prayers, but I remember it very vividly, so I looked it up very quickly. It says, pray that herders and farmers in Nigeria whose conflict over access to land and resources has fueled religious tensions, we're talking about, for the most part, the Fulani herdsmen, may find the means to compromise and work out their differences in a nonviolent manner. And so the bishops asked us all to reflect, but then they actually asked us to act, which support aid to the church in need, Catholic Relief Services, the USCCB Solidarity Fund for Aid to the Church in Africa, and other organizations that are helping. So, and that was on one of the days of Religious Freedom Week. So the bishops are very aware of the situation in Nigeria. If for no other reason, one of the other things that we want to highlight is that the number of priests who now are coming to the West, the United States, Canada, and Europe, from African countries. It was long ago, prediction was made by Cardinal, I think it was Laurian Rugambwa, who was one of the first of the modern African cardinals in the College of Cardinals, predicted that the re-evangelization of the West would inevitably come from Africa. So it's in our interest to do everything that we can, not just to grow and promote the faith, which we're all called to do, but also then to help the church in Africa to grow, to be healthy, to be strong, because it is really one of the engines now that is driving global Catholicism.
Kathleen, thank you for the wonderful idea and for the call. Appreciate it. I'm going to try to get everybody on if I can with Dr. Bunson before we have to go. We're talking about the church in the news. Steve in Napomo, California is next, watching on YouTube. Welcome back, Steve. Go ahead with your question for Dr. Bunson.
Oh, thank you, Cy. I just wanted to let you guys know how much I appreciate what EWTN has done for a non-Catholic man, helping me study my way into the church. I watch your nightly news, I watch The World Over, and I watch all of your programs. I don't watch any other news. I only watch you and Catholic Answers, and my wife, who is Catholic, took care of that and made sure that we support both of your organizations. I love what you're doing. Here's a man in Central Coast, California, who loves it, a non-Catholic who's studying his way and appreciates everything you've done. God bless y'all.
Well, thank you, and we'll pray for you as you continue your journey, hopefully into the church. So I appreciate the comment, and it's comments like that too that remind us just how important the work that we're doing, but how faithful we have to be as we do it.
Steve, thank you. You're always so generous to us, and I do think one of the great things about EWTN is that serendipitous thing that happens when people find you by accident all the time. You know,
Yes.
what is this?
Yeah.
Who are these people? What are they talking about? Why do they have a news show? What's this about?
Well, there are the famous stories of people who were scrolling through their televisions and happened upon this nun who was talking to them straight into the camera and found her absolutely riveting. And sure enough, it was Mother Angelica. And these people had stumbled on EWTN, and it was a life-changing moment when they first started to hear her.
Yeah, and she had that. There was just that charisma that she had, accompanied by humor.
Yes.
I often think that is an underestimated quality of that. Her good humor, I think, attracted many people, which we could all learn from. We're all so fussy and angry now, and I include myself in that. Like, okay, every now and then, maybe a little honey, not all vinegar.
Yes, yeah, humor, we have lost in some ways our ability to laugh.
Yeah.
And we've really lost an ability to laugh at ourselves.
So anything else big coming this year besides the Synod? Is the Synod the big story for the year in the Catholic Church? Or there's the Eucharistic Congress coming up, huh?
We have a couple of major events coming in 2024. First, obviously, the presidential election and
we got
huge
that.
federal elections. Yeah, as though we're going to be allowed to forget that.
Right.
And we've got the Synod, but then we also have, you're right, the Eucharistic Congress, part of the Eucharistic Revival that's going to be in Indianapolis, I think in July. And then we also have the International Eucharistic Congress that's going to be held in Quito, Ecuador. And
wow. That's a tough place to have a Congress right now, isn't it?
Well, I remember when the announcement was made, I was in Budapest covering the last International Eucharistic Congress, and the announcement was made that it was going to be in Quito. And there were some raised eyebrows, but again, it makes sense. So the Eucharistic Congress has been all over the world, so why not hold it in Quito, Ecuador? And as of right now, it looks like I'll be going, so perhaps
we'll pray for you.
Perhaps we can do a show from Quito, Ecuador.
Notice I didn't ask you to make me the special correspondent in the.
Yes,
you might have to make a note of that. Will you all do like a bit? I mean, I can't imagine the Indiana thing. EWTN is pretty much going to move to Indiana for that, aren't you? I mean, you're going to have a big studio set up there and all that.
Yeah, we're very active in terms of this Eucharistic Congress. So look in the months that are coming for the heavy coverage that we're going to be doing there. It's an important moment for the U.S. Church, and it's an important moment for U.S. Catholics and for all citizens.
Yeah, indeed. And the thing about a Eucharistic Congress is Jesus is coming, and the consequences of that, some of the congresses that have happened in the history of this country
have had
1926 in Chicago comes to mind.
Right, and it just had multiplying effects out through the Catholic community in America. So pray for it, pray for it. Dr. Matthew Bunson
is just getting out of Jesus' way.
That's right. Well, I'm not so good at that. I mean, you had to point to that one, right? But yeah, get out of his way and let him do his work. I hope we'll see you there in Indiana. I plan on being with you in Rome in October, and thank you for a very fine hour. Appreciate it.
Oh, great. Great to be with you always, anytime.
Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. We'll be right back with Ask a Priest on Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. So happy to be back with Father Sam Keys, who it's awful nice to talk to, former chaplain here at Catholic Answers, now pastor of his own Philadelphia area parish. And I was thinking, Father, I had an idea today that when you're on, we shouldn't call it Ask a Priest, we should call it Ask a Father, because you're a father. You see what I'm saying? You're a father and a father. You're both kinds of father.
It's a very clever idea.
Yeah.
You should.
All right, thanks. I come up with these things every now and then. Then they usually have to talk me down in a meeting. They'll be like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then they ask me to go out for donuts or something. Ask a Priest, and Father Sam Keys is a priest of the Catholic Church, raised Anglican, was ordained at Anglican priest.
Wait, hold on. I wasn't raised Anglican.
Oh, you weren't?
No, I was raised Southern Baptist.
Holy smokes, the story gets better every time I hear it. I probably knew that. I apologize, Father.
Yeah, that's all right.
You don't want to leave out Southern Baptist. If someone's got that on their resume, there's quality to that.
That's right. No, my parents are still there. That's most of my extended family. They're all Baptists.
Now, wait. If you were raised Southern Baptist, were you raised Southern or just Southern Baptist somewhere else? Do you see what I'm saying? Were you raised?
I was raised in the Deep South. Yeah, I'm from Mississippi. So
how do I know? How do I not know that you're from Mississippi?
It's probably because I gave you COVID and you lost a lot of your memories.
That's true. I wasn't going to mention that. I used to introduce you as the priest who tried to kill me.
Guess.
But I don't do that anymore because I felt that was becoming offensive to introduce you as the priest who tried to kill me. But yes, you did give me COVID. You handled the COVID fine. You got better. I did not. I took a whole summer to get better. Whole summer and a little longer. Yeah. It's all right though, Father. I don't have any hard feelings. As a matter of fact, I hardly have any feelings anymore. I don't even have thoughts. I've suffered so much damage from the COVID you gave me that. Okay, so what I was trying to get at was sometimes people are slightly scandalized by you on here because I will ask you about your children and they'll be like, "Why does this Catholic priest have children?" And the reason is that he is a priest of the. Don't tell me. Ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
It's a long name.
I know, really, it's not
I think it's probably the longest title of any diocese that I know of.
But it's because you're special, and everyone in the ordinariate is special. It's mostly people.
We're all very special in our own way.
Yes, as Mr. Rogers would say.
But to be fair, we're not the only. I mean, there are. I mean, I don't know the stats, but most dioceses in this country have maybe one or two married priests. But because this whole idea of ordaining men who were ministers in some other Protestant church who then came into the Catholic Church, that's been going on for I think 70 something years.
Yeah.
So it's not like super prominent, but it is there. It does exist, and so. And then, of course, it's interesting because I'm in a place where there's a Ukrainian Catholic church like 2 blocks up the road. And so everybody here is like, oh, yeah, married priest, not a big deal. Like they're used to it.
Oh, yeah, right.
So because they have a lot of exposure to, the Eastern Rite Catholic churches. So it kind of depends a lot on your local context and what's normal, what's the kind of mainstream.
Yeah, but so for those who don't know, there are married priests in the Catholic Church. It's not the highest percentage, but there are married priests, and Father is one of them. And you are welcome to call if you have a question for a Catholic priest. You don't have to be Catholic to call. As a matter of fact, if you're Southern Baptist, how exciting would that be? Because I just discovered that Father was raised in Mississippi as a Southern Baptist.
We could sing some hymns.
Wait, like what's a hymn? I'm going to go to the phones, 888-318-7884. But what would be a hymn that Southern Baptists in Mississippi might sing? I don't really know.
Well, I mean, a lot of them don't even really sing hymns anymore. They just sing the kind of modern stuff. But there's I don't know. I think of a classic kind of altar call song like "Just As I Am." just as I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and so on and so forth. But yeah, there's a lot of those hymns that
I bet you have nostalgia for them, because that sounds like a
yeah,
lovely
yeah.
hymn. That doesn't sound like some
Yeah.
of the warbling we're doing currently in the
No, I
Catholic
mean,
Church.
there's pretty much every tradition has some hymns that maybe aren't the best, but
Oh, okay.
There are definitely some that I wouldn't want to sing probably, but there are some nice ones. I went to my last, I think it was back in December, just before Christmas. I went to my papa's funeral down in Mississippi, and it was a sort of a Presbyterian Baptist something, it was at a Presbyterian church, but he was a Baptist, right? So, and it was really, there were a lot of issues I would have had with some of the content of the message, but there were some nice hymns, and it was really lovely, for me. Certainly,
Isn't that nice? Yeah.
Brought out some of those kind of emotional, nostalgia about my experience there. And as I always say to people, when I became Catholic, it's not like I just kind of, took all that and just put a big X over it and, throw it all out.
No.
I mean, there's a kind of, sifting and valuing and appropriating what was good and taking that experience, with me into the Catholic Church.
888-318-7884, the number. We'll start in Midland, Texas. Listening on the Catholic Answers Live app is Ryan in Midland, Texas. Ryan, thank you for downloading our app onto your phone. Go ahead with your question for Father Sam Keys.
Hey, Father Sam, I wanted to ask you, when the Divine Worship Missal was revised a few years ago, why did it not include the Rite to Mass option? Was it based on the 1928 Book of Common Prayer?
Okay. So you mean Rite to as in like the contemporary language from the 1979 prayer book?
Yeah.
Is that what
Are
you're
you guys talking Anglican right now? 'Cause none of this sounds...
Let me just explain a little bit. So for those of us who were today, if you go, to an Episcopal church, they use what's called the 1979 Book of Common Prayer, and it's kind of big. Well, one of its innovations, I suppose, for good or ill, was a kind of contemporary language version of all the services, which was so they kind of had everything, and there was what they called Rite 1 and Rite 2. And Rite 1 was the kind of traditional Elizabethan language of the older prayer books, and then Rite 2 was the kind of contemporary language, which, by the way, was pretty much directly inspired by the translation of the Roman Missal in the 1970s. So the whole "and also with you," right, which Catholics don't use anymore because there was a new translation of the Roman Missal, but that's still in operation in at least large portions of Anglicanism. Anyway, so the question was, why isn't that part of our Ordinariate Missal, which is kind of a, fully Catholicized, version of some of those Anglican sources? And I mean, it's a good question. I've actually heard this question before, but I think that the one answer is that 79 prayer book, that was not the primary source material that the compilers were looking at. They were looking especially at both the older prayer books as well as the Missal tradition, because the fact is, the kind of majority of people who came out of Anglicanism into the Catholic Church were, they were of that more kind of, high church or so-called Anglo-Catholic variety, and so they were more typically drawn to the traditional language. And I think, I don't know, there might be a lot of other answers to this, but to me, the most substantial reason is probably, and I'm kind of speculating here, just that was not, that wasn't unique enough, to justify having a separate missal. In other words, if you had a sort of quote unquote Rite 2 version, it starts looking a lot like just the ordinary form of the Roman Rite, as opposed to a distinctive kind of set of language and prayers within the Roman Rite. And so to me, like there was probably the thinking of, well, if we're gonna do this and we're gonna justify having this whole separate structure, let's actually have it be unique and different in some substantial ways, rather than just being like the modern Roman Rite with just like one or two extra prayers added to it. You know, it's actually retained, I think, the bulk of it. And that's the other answer. I guess the third thing would just be that if you think about the history of Anglican worship and worship in English, actually, you know, that 1979 thing, that's a pretty small. I mean, there's basically 400 years of what we call traditional language worship before that. And so it's just like, okay, well, this thing that's happened over the last few decades, it's a pretty small slice in time. And that's not really central to this this tradition, which has, as Pope Benedict says in the Apostolic Constitution, Anglican Orem Cedibus, he says, which has allowed and formed people towards Catholic unity. So at least that's my thought on the question.
Ryan, I'm going to leave it there because we are a little late for the break, but thank you for the call. There's one line open. It's Ask a Priest today on Catholic Answers Live, 888-318-7884.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The most original Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
On Mother Angelica Answering the Call, Father Joseph and Doug Keck mine decades of phone calls answered by Mother Angelica. No subject is off limits and no problem too big for the wisdom and compassion of the one and only Mother Angelica.
Mother Angelica Answering the Call, Sunday afternoon, 2 Eastern, on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Our guest is Father Sam Keys. And our topic, your questions. It's Ask a Priest today on Catholic Answers Live, 888-318-7884. I found a list of popular Baptist hymns, and I was quizzing Father on them. And I see How Great Thou Art is one, and we sing How Great Thou Art in the Catholic Church. Like, I love that hymn.
Do you sing that often?
No, we don't sing any good music often. But you know, at a funeral or something, you hear How Great Thou Art. I love that song.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's not in. We use, at least in my parish, and like it's pretty typical in the ordinary, we use the 1940 hymnal. For now, we are producing our own hymnal, which is very exciting. And one of these days, before. You know, if I live and the Lord tarries, we'll see that hymnal. But you know, for now, a lot of us use the 1940 hymnal, which is an Episcopal Church hymnal, and it's pretty solid. I mean, it's a great hymnal, but it doesn't have that in it. It doesn't have some of those, I guess, what I would think of as more Baptist-y hymns.
Oh.
It also doesn't have the big thing it lacks from a Catholic perspective is it doesn't have a lot of like the great Marian hymns. It has a couple, but like not as many as you really need, you know. So we have to supplement, you know.
All right, let's go to Rachel in Tennessee watching on YouTube. Rachel, thanks for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Father Keys.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for taking my call. I am in RICA, and I was raised Southern Baptist, and I'm trying to understand fully how Catholics view sin and forgiveness. I'm really struggling with it. And so can I give you an example and then you tell me how that would how that would work?
I think that would be awesome. Let's do that. Yes.
Okay. So, say you have a woman who has, 2 or 3 kids and then decides she doesn't want any more. She's Catholic. She understands the church's view of contraception. But she decides to have her tubes tied anyways because she doesn't want to have any more children. And then she goes to confession and she says, I had my tubes tied. And the priest says, okay, and you're forgiven. But she's, of course, in this instance, you don't really know the person's heart, but clearly she's relieved. She's not going to have any more children. She's, happy that she did it. She'd probably do it again. So is she, in that case, or like say a young person who goes out every weekend and parties and gets really drunk and does things they shouldn't do, and then they're like, oh man, I better go to confession on Sunday morning, and then they go out and do it again the next weekend.
Have you been to a Catholic college? It just sounds like you're familiar with Catholic college life, but go ahead.
I'm just trying to see how, because that just doesn't make sense to me.
Yes,
Father. That just because the priest says you're forgiven, you're forgiven. When does this make sense?
It makes perfect sense, Father.
I think there are a couple different, angles to this. But let's start with the fact that the fact that the priest says it doesn't mean that that's only one part of the equation, right? So with any sacrament, we have what's called form and matter. And in other words, the classic examples with baptism and the Eucharist, like, you have the form, which is the words, I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And then you have the matter, which is water. Same thing with the Eucharist. You can say the words of institution all you want, but if you don't actually have bread and wine, there's no sacrament, right? And the same way with the sacrament of penance or confession, there's the form, the words of absolution of, I absolve you from your sins in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. There's a sort of longer form, but that's the kind of crucial part of it. That's the form, but in order for the sacrament to take, right, to be valid, to do anything, you also need the matter, and the matter is a little bit, more tricky than something material like water or, wine. It's the penitence or the repentance of the penitent, right? So in other words, if you go to confession and you, again, we're just kind of speculating here. You make a good show. You say make your act of contrition, but you really don't mean a word of it. You're not repentant at all. You're just going because you want to, I don't know, trick the priest and everybody, whatever. Then there's no absolution. Not really, because you're lacking the matter of the sacrament. Of course, that's a purely internal matter. Like, nobody knows that but you. Maybe you're even kind of deceived about it yourself, possibly. But the thing is, that's the kind of extreme. But I think there's a lot of room in the middle where we have what the church classically calls imperfect contrition, as opposed, perfect contrition is where you know that you did wrong, you genuinely feel bad about it, and you fully intend to never do it again, and you feel bad about it for all the right reasons. In other words, out of love, out of love for God, and love for neighbor, and love of the good. Imperfect contrition is when something is lacking there. Maybe you feel bad about it, but the main feeling is that as like fear, right? Your fear that the fear of hell, right? The fear of punishment, the fear of separation from God, the fear of, even just on a more practical level, the fear that you'll be cut off from the sacraments. That you can't go and receive Holy Communion because you're in a state of sin, right? Those are imperfect ways of parts of contrition. What the Church teaches about that is that the sacrament of penance can help us to transform that imperfect contrition into a more perfect contrition. That's part of what the grace of the sacrament is intended to do, to help perfect that imperfect contrition and perfect and sort of make it perfect, more perfect. The thing is, lots of people, this is ask any priest. I mean, like so many of the confessions that we hear are people who are, confessing a lot of the same thing over and over again. If you see the same penitents often, maybe you remember it, maybe you don't. But for a lot of people, it looks. I mean, a lot of us are like that. Look, I mean, my confessions often sound very similar to one another. And I think that's pretty typical. And so I don't think that necessarily means that you're lacking in any, contrition. Part of what it means is just that the things you're dealing with are hard, and it takes a long time. And, we're human, and perfection and holiness is a gradual work over time. It is not magic. It takes a discipline and growth and virtue. And that's why we get that sacramental grace to help us grow in that virtue. So it's not something to. I mean, I don't know. I guess we could think about the scenario that you mentioned. I mean, there's a whole nother kind of can of worms there, thinking about some of those issues around contraception. But there are a lot of scenarios kind of similar to that where. The church always errs on the side of generosity and mercy. So, that's certainly something that Pope Francis has been big on, sometimes more helpfully than others, but, the principles there in terms of the church's approach to the sacramental life, that if somebody, for example, comes to me, and this is a much more common situation, and they say, I was married outside of the church, or I was divorced and remarried, or there's some sort of situation where like they're living in a relationship that is objectively not marriage, and so it's an objective situation of sin, at least potentially. But they want to come back to the sacraments, and they genuinely are going to try to work towards the resolution of that situation, and then they can say something like, I'm going to commit to living, quote unquote, as brother and sister with my spouse, and we're going to take that kind of sacrificial journey together as we work towards the correction of the situation, and so that we can eventually, hopefully, Lord willing, either find ourselves in a valid marriage or separate. That's enough for it that commitment to living to virtue, even if they know that there's a good chance that they will fall short in that eventually. That's the church is going to still meet them and provide that grace, because we want that help. I deal with and I, again, ask any priest, the many people who deal with sins of addiction, and frankly, almost every sin can have an addictive quality to it, but especially things, with substance abuse, with sins of lust that can be addictive. Often it's a real struggle, and they know that they're not going to get to perfection overnight, but they can make the commitment right now, like, I am going to commit to do better, to try to avoid this, and there's a genuine repentance, and if there's not, I mean, I can't read their minds, but there does have to be that repentance for the absolution to be real.
Did that get to what you were looking for, Rachel?
Yeah, I think so. I'll probably listen to this again. I am really struggling with the way sin is viewed in the Catholic Church. Just because I was raised, once saved, always saved, and all sins are equal in the eyes of God. And so to go to something very differently, different. And I believe it's true, but I'm having a hard time understanding it, and I find myself becoming scrupulous and obsessing a little bit over like everything, what is sin, what isn't sin, what's going on in my mind, is that sin, and what if I'm not actually forgiven, all of those things, and then I see that, so I'm just trying to get more clarity. But I think that definitely was helpful, and I'll pray, like I said, I'll listen to this again.
Okay. Well, and let me just add one little brief parting thought with what you were saying about, all sins being equal. I mean, because that's something, I was raised with that idea too. And I think if you think about sin as an analogy to bodily health, right? And sin is a wound against the soul and against the body. If you think about wounds against the body, there's a difference, right? There's a big difference if I just get like a little scratch on my arm and it heals in a day. That's pretty different from like a gunshot wound in the gut, right? And so and sin is like that, and so there are levels of gravity to it, and it affects us in different ways. Some sins affect us in really powerful, profound ways where we need like really intense medicine to deal with it. So that's.
Rachel,
I think that's
important. You probably can hear the music, Rachel, so we have to go to the break. If you want to hang on the line, I'd like to send you a copy of our book, Why We're Catholic. If you'd like a copy of it, we'll send it to you. And please call again. What exciting news that you're discerning, entering full communion with the Catholic Church. Right back with more Ask a Priest with Father Keys.
Why We're Catholic is the one book you can hand to anyone to invite them into or back to the Catholic faith. With more than 400,000 copies sold, Trent Horn's book has had a #1 ranking on Amazon.com for 5 years running. Now available in softcover, bulk cases, ebook, and on Audible. Find out what the excitement is all about. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic at shop.catholic.com or visit whywearecatholic.com.
Is relativism dead? It sure seems dead. Each day, new moral demands are made, and they are presented to us as absolutes. Everything, from transgender ideology to physician-assisted suicide, is presented as a moral good that all right-thinking people must accept. But Catholic Answer's own Carlo Broussard says look deeper, and you will see today's moralism is just relativism dressed up in new clothes. Carlo's eye-opening book, The New Relativism, shines a light on how the sacred moral teachings of this age cover up a deep denial of moral truth. Order your copy of The New Relativism today at shop.catholic.com and be prepared to defend the truth against aggressive relativism. The New Relativism at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. What a nice call to get from Rachel in Tennessee, who was herself a Southern Baptist, now coming into the church. And Father Sam Keys, our guest this hour, as I've always known, was also a Southern Baptist for a while. I actually learned it about 15 minutes ago, but and we invited Southern Baptists to call, and there was Rachel. What a lovely call, too. Daniel's in Colorado listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Daniel, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Father.
Hey, Father. I grew up a Southern Baptist, so I understand.
It's an all Southern Baptist day today.
The world is full of ex-Southern Baptists.
Wow. All right. Well, very cool, Daniel. Go ahead.
And Father, you got to. I'm sure all your penance is taken care of because Cy blames you for everything. So
he tried to kill me, Daniel. All right, I'm not going to get into it, but go ahead. Go ahead. I'm going to stay out of this.
My question is inside the ordinariate, how is it structured in regards to like things like annulments and evangelization and education and things like that?
Okay, those are pretty different topics. I mean, okay, I'll answer the question about annulments. That's relatively simple because we don't actually have our own tribunal right now because we're kind of a small diocese and we're scattered abroad. I mean, we're 40 communities in all of North America. So typically the way that tribunals work is that they have jurisdiction over the area. So typically, like if I have, and I've only been here 6 months, but if I need to do something with a marriage case, for example, I go through the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, or the what do they call it, the Metropolitan Tribunal here in Philadelphia, or same thing anywhere else. So and actually that's a little kind of nerdy side note. The tribunal doesn't just have jurisdiction over Catholics when it comes, because the church actually asserts her ability to interpret issues of the natural law with marriage. So you don't even have to be a Catholic to submit a marriage case to that tribunal. I don't know how many people do that, but it's an interesting possibility. The question about what do you mean by evangelization in this case? Like about he's not here.
No, he's listening offline.
Okay, that's all right. I mean, I'm not entirely sure that I understand the question. I mean, but certainly our evangelization is really central to our mission because we're all about bringing people into the full communion of the church, and spreading the gospel, and both to there's kind of multiple groups, right? There's those who are completely outside the church, who have no encounter with the Christian faith. There are those who are outside the communion of the church, and then there are also those who are lapsed Catholics. I was saying to a minute ago, it's not that unusual for me to hear people who are coming back to the church after decades, and that's a beautiful thing. So evangelization is central to it, but that's what that looks like is very local. We don't have a lot of dioceses will have like an office for evangelization or an office for we're just too small. We don't have any of that stuff. So a lot of that's kind of handled at a very local level, and various communities will take advantage of resources locally that they might find, sometimes within the local diocese, sometimes elsewhere. So I hope that helps answer the question.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for the call. Going to keep on we go. Dominic's in Jacksonville, Florida, watching on YouTube. Dominic, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Father Sam Keys.
Hi, thanks for having me. I come from like an evangelical Pentecostal background, but lately I've been looking into both Catholicism and Orthodoxy and the early church history. And one thing I've been wondering is I heard of the Eastern Catholic churches, the Eastern rites, and I was wondering how they managed to be in full communion with Rome, but they simultaneously venerate saints that are saints specifically for their opposition to Roman doctrine, like Saint Mark from the Council of Florence, or some of the saints defending Miaphysitism. And I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but I think one of the Eastern churches venerates Nestorius, and how the Byzantine Catholic rite, they don't say the Filioque when they say the Nicene Creed. So how are they in communion when it seems like they still disagree with Rome on a lot of things?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I mean, I'm gonna punt a little bit in saying that you really should ask an Eastern Catholic because they would be able to answer that much better than I will. Because I'm partly just kind of answering this is going to be at least partly guessing. I mean, I have some experience with Eastern Catholics, but not not a lot, especially as come at some of these questions. I think the most important thing is that there's not, well, I know that you might hear various things, from individuals, but like in principle, there is no disagreement with Rome. There is rather, there's a difference in kind of theological emphasis and kind of different themes that I mean, if you think of of doctrine as a kind of great symphony, I mean, there's kind of the Eastern churches, they have their own instruments, they have their own kind of slightly different way of playing the music, which is recognized as valid and of great antiquity and value. Going back as far as it does, and with its tradition of sanctity. As far as the question about certain saints, again, I'm kind of a little bit out of my depth there, but I would say that I would simply point to the fact that that a lot of saints, even in the Latin West, have their flaws. If you look at their earthly life, that the fact that they're saints in heaven doesn't mean that every single thing they did in their earthly life was perfect. And in fact, some of them, I mean, if you want to, classic kind of doctrinal examples, St. Thomas Aquinas himself disagreed with the idea of the Immaculate Conception, and yet it is now officially the dogma of the church, right? So the fact that he's wrong about something doesn't mean that he can't be a saint. I guess we might say that, well, he's right about it now, because he's in heaven. I mean, obviously that's a little bit trickier if you're looking at somebody who, at least on appearances, is sort of venerated at least partly because of their opposition to certain doctrines. I could see how that would be a little bit more, just a little bit more difficult. But I think the principle is still the same, which is that sanctity and the fact that we the church is confident that a certain person is in heaven interceding for us, that is a different thing from saying that the church sort of endorses every single thing that they ever did. That's the main thing I would say. Other than that, I would talk to an Eastern Catholic. I'm sure that there's going to be surely there's somebody coming on the show at some point in the near future. So keep an eye on that.
We sometimes have a Eastern Catholic priest on with us. So keep that in mind. You might also check Catholic.com because I know that it has been answered. I don't know how well it's been cataloged, the answer, but I know we have answered that question. Dominic, thank you. Lots and lots of people on the line, so I have to keep moving. Judy's in Olympia, Washington, listening on our website, Catholic.com. Judy, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Father Sam Keys.
Oh, hello, Father. Thank you for taking my call. I'm just come back to the Catholic Church after 50 years.
Praise God, Judy.
Thank you. The issue was that I was excommunicated in 1977 for a divorce, and I just assumed that I was not worthy of my Catholic heritage and never came back to the church. I tried many, many churches over the years and just could never find a home. And I was talking to a friend who was Catholic, and she said, well, let's Google it. And, when we Googled, and sure enough, it said excommunication. And so I just gave up for another 25 years. And I ran into another friend just recently who said, just go to church. Don't take communion, and just go to church. So I did, and I was home.
Oh,
and
Judy.
I just couldn't believe it. And I thought, I've got to do something about this. So I went to our local parish, and I went to confession, and the priest was like Christ himself talking to me, and I was forgiven. That I was actually forgiven after 50 years. And so I am just, I guess I want to advocate, don't rely on Google.
Oh, Judy, if I may add to what you're saying, and what a beautiful thing, and thank God for that priest who is able to act like Jesus in that way, and that he has been formed in such a way to bring Jesus to people. But there's so many people who say things online that lead to other people. I mean,
if it's not the teaching of the church, just don't pass it off as the teaching of the church. And if you don't know the teaching, then we have resources. There's a person called Jimmy Akin. You ask him and he tells you what. And there's probably other resources as well. But Judy, thank God that you are back.
Praise God. That's good.
Father, did you want to say something?
No, praise God. I'm glad that you were able to make that journey.
Thank you, and I really appreciate what you said to the earlier caller about reconciliation. I really appreciate it, and it really helped me feel even more. I felt better even after that. I felt even better. So thank you, Father.
Awesome. Judy, I'd like to send you a book just to say thanks for that beautiful call. We have lots of good books and books by Joe Heschmeyer. So talk to Edgar. He'll send you. Maybe we could send her Why We're Catholic if she'd like it. But if she already has that or would like another one, that's fine too, Edgar. Thanks. The number is 888-318-7884. Did I do the break, Jack, or do I have to do the break now? I have to do the break now? Okay. What a professional asking on the air whether I have to do the break. Top professional radio host here, right back with more with Father Keys right after this.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Whether you are a seasoned believer, someone exploring your faith, or even if you're simply curious, Beacon of Truth with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers is the place for you. We'll discuss the big questions, explore the richness of our spiritual traditions, and discover the common threads that bind us together. Join us starting Monday, February 5th at 4 p.m. Eastern for Beacon of Truth with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, only on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Our guest is Father Sam Keys, and a wonderful priest who we were delighted to have as our chaplain. He did try to kill me once, but that's a different story. I'm not getting into that. Joseph in Cleveland, Ohio, listening on AM 1260, The Rock. Bernadette, our good friend, runs that station, and we're happy to take your call. Joseph, go ahead with your question for Father.
Earlier in your broadcast, I heard Father Keys talking about altar call. And a few years ago, I bumped into two Catholics, and I never went to Catholic school. In fact, I'm baptized in the old Catholic Church, Post-National Catholic Church, but I had all my other sacraments in the Roman Rite. And my dad was Eastern Rite. And so I'm still learning now, and EWTN is my best teacher. So these two Catholics, one's brother wasn't there. He goes to some evangelical church, and they have like an altar call. And the fellow said to me, "Why don't they have an altar call in the Catholic Church to come up? It means so much." And I'm thinking, well, it's because we're already there. And so I don't really know how to defend that. The question would be, why do Catholics not need an altar call?
I'm not so sure about that, Father.
Yeah. I mean, my answer would just be that we do have an altar call, and it's called, when we come forward to receive Holy Communion or to receive a blessing or just to be closer to Jesus. And, that's, we actually have altars. That's the other thing.
And we all get called up to it every Mass.
Right. I mean, that's the nature of it. It's, I think, at least when I was growing up, they referred to when they said, go to the altar. What that really meant was like this kind of rail at the bottom of the platform where you could go and pray. It was more of a kind of spiritual altar. And of course, that's the whole idea of the altar call is the kind of, the minister stands down front and they play a kind of, emotionally pulling kind of music, and you kind of come down and you either you get prayed for, or you give your life to Christ, or you rededicate your life, or something or sometimes you just join the church, right? But the point is it's a kind of moment of public decision. Well, again, I think we have that. I mean, that is Holy Communion in a certain way. Now I'm gonna play. Well, I won't say devil's advocate, but there is something about the public nature of that I do appreciate. I mean, that idea of, I'm gonna like stand up and like walk down and potentially make a fool of myself, for Jesus. That is a real beautiful thing, and that's something that maybe we could learn from, most of us in the Catholic Church, because actually maybe we kind of err on the other end of the spectrum, that like a lot of us, when I say that going forward is the altar call, we kind of take that for granted, right? We just kind of assume, oh yeah, I should just go receive communion all the time whenever I'm in church, right? And I think that's the sort of that's the pendulum has swung from, maybe a couple hundred years ago, people were receiving Holy Communion too infrequently. Now there's I think that the more common thing is for Catholics to kind of take it for granted, and maybe they go to communion like every week, but they go to confession like once a year, if that, and so there's that call, to go forward and to unite ourselves with Christ and with His church. Like, that's a serious call that we should approach with caution and with sorry, I'm just being redundant in my language, but we should take it seriously. So that's all I have to say about that, I think.
All right, Joseph, I'll tell you what, if you'd like, I'd like to send you a copy also of Why We're Catholic. If you'd like it, I'd be happy to send it to you. Thank you for the call and for the question. I'm just going quick now because the clock is my enemy, and I've got a lot of folks to get on. We'll go to Jay in Virginia. Jay, thank you for calling. Go ahead with your question for Father.
Yes, hello, Father Keys. How are you?
Hello. I'm great. How are you?
Great. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, great. It's great to hear. I was listening to EWTN, and what drew me in was the fact that you're an ordinariate priest, and which I have deep appreciation for that, and Pope Benedict's vision there with the Anglican patrimony coming over. And also my question is going to be from the context of appreciation for the ordinariate and love for Mother Church as a Protestant minister. So I'm a Methodist minister and have been for 20 years. But I have had a call, a sense of draw to the church. And so that would mean converting. But I have talked with the ordinariate, and I'm concerned, or not concerned, but I'm interested in how many people are coming over, and also aware of the Coming Home Network, and talking with people there about a number of Protestant clergy who convert. They give up their ministry, of course, and they convert to be lay people. But it seems that there are very few who actually go into priestly formation. I've heard that just there are not that many, and I wondered if there is, why that is. Is it lack of staff at the ordinariate to handle the load, or is it just there aren't that many? And my question is going to be a little challenging. Is the church and our bishops and priests open to Protestant clergy coming over, or are they still hanging on to suspicions about Protestant Reformation, clergy coming over with Protestant ideas? What would you say to that?
Well, lots of good questions. And now I'm forgetting the first. Okay, let's start with the most recent thing about the bishops and suspicion and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know. I don't have a good way of answering that. I mean, I'm sure that there is some of that, but I think in many cases there are just kind of practical concerns. I certainly don't speak for my bishop in the ordinariate or any diocesan bishops. I've gathered that at least in a sort of ordinary diocesan context, the issue So there are kind of separate issues with just kind of the idea of a Protestant minister coming in and seeking ordination or formation as a Catholic priest. That's a distinct question from a married minister coming in. I mean, there is, because it's just a different process, because there are just more permissions that are needed, and any diocesan bishop is capable of going through a process of seeking permission to ordain a married man who is a former Protestant minister, but it's a lot of work. I think it's extra work. It's different, right? And so there's maybe a question of like, is it worth it? To jump through all these extra hoops, and then secondly, and this I have heard, and I don't know how accurate this is, but there's sometimes concern about having too many married priests in one place, and sort of changing the character of the presbyterate. I don't know how accurate that is, and whether it's a real fear or whether it's just kind of a fear that's kind of talked about in the kind of rumor mill, but it's certainly possible. I mean, and I definitely have experienced, here and there a certain amount of suspicion. It's not at all the mainstream for me. I mean, in most of the places where I've been nothing but welcomed by priests and laity in the local diocese. So it's been a very, very positive experience. But you do kind of pick up, vibe here and there among those who maybe feel kind of threatened by it in one way or the other. But that just varies so much, I guess, from place to place. I will say that the ordinariate is we are very small. I mean, I don't want to harp on that, but it is very small. So the fact is, we our staff, it's not just a matter of like, oh, we're going to, go push through the process every kind of minister who comes to us who wants to become Catholic, partly because the mission of the ordinariate is not just to ordain priests, right? I mean, that's just kind of, to put it bluntly, it's to provide for communities of people originally who came into the Catholic Church together, and to allow for those communities to evangelize and to thrive in the Catholic Church. And so actually, the ordinariate does not have the vocations crisis that many dioceses do. And so we have, in a sense, we have the opposite problem in that we have to turn guys away, unfortunately, both regular seminarians and married former Protestants. So that's a kind of unique position to be in.
Jay, I want to come back to you. Did Father address what you were looking for?
I think so. I think he gave the answer that I was expecting. And I would say, in terms of believing in the power of the Holy Spirit to convert, St. John Henry Newman, of course, labored through this and concluded that once one realizes the truth, the beatific vision, and you see the truth in the Church as one holy, Catholic, and apostolic, then you really have no reason to remain Protestant. And of course, you also appreciate the fact that the Church did reform, as Martin Luther aimed to do. So with the Counter-Reformation and the continual sanctification of Mother Church and the Blessed Magisterium, so there's really no reason for Protestants who are truly called to stay Protestant. I mean, the name itself is protest, right? So right. I guess my concern, my prayer for concern going forth is that the Church should really look at not ordaining every person who comes down the pike, of course not, to give them more credit than that. That, the Methodist Church, for example, that I come out of, has a very deep, faithful process of ordination. They don't just ordain anyone. And so it seems to me that the Church really should pray about not just praying for vocations, but really praying from the heart to open the door and to be more welcoming for those who are truly called, because the power of the Holy Spirit is converting lots of people, and there are lots of Catholic laity who would really like to see a few more priests.
Yeah. Well, I can't disagree with anything
No,
you've said
what a
there.
beautiful invitation.
Yeah,
And certainly being open to the promptings of the Holy Spirit is a wonderful invitation for all of us. Hey, if there's any book that we can send you, I don't know if there is a book that we have that you would like, but if there is one, please just tell Edgar and he'll send it to you. And I hope we'll get to speak again. The music playing means we got to go. Father, thank you so much. I always enjoy that hour with you.
You're welcome. It's been great. It's fun.
Yeah, and I feel safe from you across the country.
Yeah.
Could we and our listeners have your blessing before we go, Father?
Right. The peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and of His Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost be amongst you and remain with you always.
Amen. Thank you, Father. That'll do it for us. I guess we'll see you next time. Yeah, God willing, we'll see you next time right here at Catholic Answers Live.